A patient stands at a pharmacy counter. A doctor has prescribed a medication. The pharmacist scans the barcode on the plastic bottle. The computer screen returns a price. To the patient, this transaction appears as a straightforward exchange of physical goods. A manufacturer makes a chemical, a pharmacy dispenses it, and an insurance plan covers the cost. But the number on that screen is a fiction. It is the end result of a microscopic, high-frequency negotiation happening in the shadows of the American healthcare system. The doctor did not set the price. The pharmacy did not set the price. The pharmaceutical company did not set the final price. The entity controlling the transaction is an invisible intermediary known as a pharmacy benefit manager, or PBM. In 2023, the Federal Trade Commission released an interim staff report documenting a staggering reality. Just 6 of these companies handled more than 90% of all prescription claims in the United States. They sit at the absolute center of a trillion-dollar choke point. PBMs were originally hired to solve a very specific problem: to control runaway prescription costs for health plans and employers.
They were the defense mechanism against pharmaceutical monopolies. Yet, the architecture they built to contain costs has morphed into something entirely different. The intermediaries now extract billions of dollars through mechanisms that neither the patient nor the doctor fully understands. This is not a simple story of corporate greed. It is a story of strange economic incentives, where the rational pursuit of cost control gave birth to an opaque labyrinth of rebates, spread pricing, and vertically integrated corporate structures. The mechanism is brilliant. It is perfectly legal, and it forces us to ask a fundamental question about modern markets. What happens when the entity hired to negotiate the price realizes its true power lies in keeping the true price a secret?
To understand how a middleman conquers an entire market, one must look at the mechanical problem they were originally hired to solve. In the late 20th century, health insurance companies faced an administrative nightmare. Millions of patients were filling millions of physical prescriptions every week. Processing these claims required verifying eligibility, checking for adverse drug interactions, and reimbursing thousands of independent pharmacies via paper checks. It was a low-margin, high-friction paper chase. Insurers wanted out of the plumbing business. Enter the early pharmacy benefit managers. In their genesis, PBMs were nothing more than claims processors. They built the digital infrastructure to adjudicate a prescription claim in milliseconds. The Government Accountability Office, or GAO, documented this evolution clearly. Health plans hired PBMs to administer drug benefits and handle the immense logistical load of pharmacy reimbursement. But as the PBMs processed more electronic claims, they accumulated something far more valuable than standard administrative fees. They accumulated patient volume.
By aggregating millions of patients from hundreds of different health plans and corporate employers, the PBMs suddenly possessed a new kind of structural leverage. Pharmaceutical manufacturers held patents on life-saving drugs. They had unchecked pricing power. A single health insurer had little ability to force a massive drug maker to lower its price. But a PBM, representing 50 million covered lives, could walk into a negotiation with a devastating threat. Lower your price, or our 50 million patients will not buy your drug. They will buy your competitor's drug instead. This threat is materialized in a document called the formulary. The formulary is a tiered list of covered medications. If a drug is placed on Tier 1, it has a low copay, and patients will flock to it. If it is placed on Tier 3, or excluded entirely from the list, the drug maker loses access to a massive segment of the American population. The PBM controls the formulary. Therefore, the PBM controls the market share of the manufacturer. The initial logic was elegant and highly functional. The PBM uses the formulary to force rival drug makers to compete for placement.
The drug makers offer financial discounts to win that placement. The PBM passes those discounts back to the health plan, lowering premiums for everyone. The GAO reports confirm that PBMs do in fact negotiate rebates and heavily influence drug pricing. They serve a necessary function in a system where list prices are completely disconnected from manufacturing reality. But a market is defined by the contracts that bind it, and the contracts between PBMs, health plans, and drug makers contained a fatal structural flaw.
The health plans allowed the PBMs to keep a percentage of the savings they negotiated. This was intended as an alignment of incentives. The more money the PBM saved the health plan, the more money the PBM made. It seemed like a perfect equilibrium. In reality, it created a perverse economic gravity. If a PBM is paid a percentage of the discount they negotiate, their revenue becomes mathematically dependent on the absolute size of the discount. And the easiest way for a pharmaceutical manufacturer to offer a massive dollar value discount is to artificially inflate the initial list price of the drug.
A $100 drug with a $10 discount yields a small retention fee for the PBM. A $500 drug with a $200 discount yields a massive fee for the PBM, even though the final net cost to the health plan is significantly higher. The incentive structure slowly decoupled the list price from the economic value of the medicine. The PBM no longer wanted the lowest baseline price. The PBM wanted the largest available spread.
The mechanics of this system rely entirely on a concept called the rebate. When a patient buys a prescription drug, the manufacturer does not lower the price at the physical counter. Instead, the patient or their insurance plan pays a high upfront cost based on the list price. Months after the transaction clears, the manufacturer writes a lump sum check to the PBM. This delayed payment is the rebate. The rebate is the lifeblood of the modern PBM business model. It is a post-transaction financial transfer that only the PBM and the manufacturer can accurately see. The manufacturer despises paying it, but they must because the PBM holds the keys to the formulary. The health plan loves the rebate because the PBM eventually cuts them a check, which the health plan uses to artificially offset premium increases. But the patient, whose coinsurance and deductible payments are often calculated based on the inflated initial list price, absorbs the initial financial shock. This dynamic creates a bizarre paradox at the corporate negotiating table. Imagine a pharmaceutical company invents a new insulin. They want to capture immediate market share. They offer the PBM a list price of $100 with zero rebate. The net cost to the healthcare system is $100. Now, a competitor offers an identical insulin. They set the list price at $300, but offer the PBM a rebate of $150. The net cost to the system is $150. Under normal market conditions, the cheaper drug easily wins. But in the PBM economy, the more expensive drug often secures the preferred spot on the formulary. The PBM chooses the $300 drug because the massive rebate generates administrative fees, rebate retention percentages, and a float of cash flow that can be leveraged before it is passed back to the health plan. The PBM's profit is buried in the expanding delta between the list price and the net price, a phenomenon industry analysts call the gross-to-net bubble. The individuals executing these contracts are highly rational actors. They are fulfilling their fiduciary duty to their corporate shareholders. They operate within the exact parameters established by their clients.
Health plans continue to hire them because without a PBM, the health plan would have to negotiate with the largest pharmaceutical conglomerates on their own. The PBMs are an indispensable shield. But a shield that demands an ever-increasing tribute soon becomes a sovereign entity of its own. They ceased being mere administrators and became market makers. By controlling the rebate flow, they dictate which molecules survive in the commercial market and which ones fail, entirely independent of clinical efficacy or actual manufacturing cost. The rebate was only the first mechanism of extraction. As congressional scrutiny over rebates increased and health plans demanded more transparency, the PBMs required new avenues for financial growth. They found it directly at the pharmacy counter. The PBM sits precisely between the health plan, paying for the drug, and the pharmacy dispensing it. When a patient hands a prescription to a pharmacist, the pharmacy's computer sends a digital signal to the PBM. The PBM replies with two distinct numbers. It tells the pharmacy how much to charge the patient in copay, and it tells the pharmacy how much the PBM will reimburse them for acquiring and dispensing the drug. Simultaneously, the PBM bills the patient's health plan for the transaction. In a transparent system, the PBM would bill the health plan the exact amount it pays the pharmacy, plus a flat, predictable administrative fee. But the contracts governing these transactions are not transparent. They are governed by a mechanism called spread pricing. Under spread pricing, the PBM utilizes separate pricing lists for the buyer and the seller. The PBM might bill the health plan $100 for a generic blood pressure medication. But the PBM only reimburses the independent pharmacy $20 for dispensing that exact same drug. The PBM pockets the $80 difference. The health plan does not know the pharmacy was paid $20. The pharmacy does not know the health plan was billed $100. The PBM operates as a classic arbitrager, exploiting the immense information asymmetry between the buyer and the seller. The GAO has documented these reimbursement arrangements extensively. Spread pricing transforms generic drugs, which are supposed to be cheap, commoditized products, into massive profit engines for the intermediaries. Independent pharmacies are caught in a vice. For years, they were legally bound by gag clauses in their contracts that prevented them from telling the patient that the drug would actually be cheaper if they simply paid cash, bypassing the insurance entirely. These clauses artificially inflated costs to maintain the PBM spread. When independent pharmacies complain that they are being reimbursed below their actual cost to acquire the drugs, they face a stark reality. They cannot simply drop the PBM.
Because just 6 PBMs control more than 90% of prescriptions, dropping a major PBM means losing a third of the pharmacy's patient base overnight. It is absolute economic suicide. But the architecture of the modern PBM is even more complex. The Federal Trade Commission's 2023 Interim Staff Report on Prescription Drug Middlemen maps out a landscape defined by aggressive vertical integration. The PBMs did not just stop at processing claims and arbitraging spreads. They began buying the physical infrastructure around them. Today, the largest PBMs are no longer standalone companies. They are fully integrated divisions of massive healthcare conglomerates. A single corporate entity now owns the health insurance company, the pharmacy benefit manager, the specialty pharmacy, the mail-order pharmacy, and even the primary care physician networks. This integration creates profound conflicts of interest. The PBM is responsible for reimbursing pharmacies fairly, but the PBM also owns its own mail-order and specialty pharmacies, which compete directly with the independent pharmacies it is reimbursing.
The FTC staff analysis points to a troubling structural incentive. A vertically integrated PBM can reimburse independent pharmacies at starvation rates, driving them out of business, while simultaneously reimbursing its own affiliated pharmacies at highly lucrative rates. The money simply moves from one pocket of the conglomerate to another. Furthermore, as specialty drugs for complex diseases like cancer and rheumatoid arthritis hit the market, they carry price tags in the tens of thousands of dollars. The PBMs routinely dictate that these lucrative prescriptions can only be filled by their own wholly owned specialty pharmacies. They capture the patient, the data, the reimbursement, and the entire margin. The independent pharmacy is locked out of the most profitable sector of modern medicine. We must preserve the truth qualifier here. The FTC findings are based on staff analysis and carefully utilize qualified language regarding incentives and potential effects. A vertically integrated structure does not mean that every single PBM contract automatically raises every patient's price.
There are massive corporate employers and sophisticated health plans that negotiate highly transparent pass-through contracts where the PBM acts exactly as it was originally intended, a low-margin administrator passing 100% of the rebates and discounts directly to the client. The GAO confirms that PBMs still deploy vital cost control functions that save health plans money compared to a world with no centralized negotiation at all. The system is not a monolith of pure extraction, but the dominant market structure remains intensely opaque. The PBM is the entity that defines the terms of trade. They audit the pharmacies, they define what constitutes a generic drug, they determine the maximum allowable cost lists, and they hold the unilateral right to alter the contract terms with little notice. They have built an environment where they are the referee, the rulebook, and the opposing team all at once. The conflict of interest is not an accident of the system. The conflict is the business model itself.
The economic contradiction of the American pharmacy benefit manager is one of the most striking phenomena in modern capitalism. A class of companies was created to constrain the pricing power of monopolies. By executing that mandate with ruthless efficiency, they became monopolies themselves. They weaponized the very complexity they were hired to manage. This is the ultimate paradox of intermediaries. When a market is too fragmented for the buyer and seller to find a fair price, the middleman provides a genuine, valuable service. The early PBMs provided liquidity, speed, and massive scale.
They aggregated demand and forced pharmaceutical companies to negotiate. But as the middleman consolidates, their incentives inevitably diverge from the entity that hired them. The health plan wants lower absolute costs. The PBM wants wider margins. And because the PBM controls the data infrastructure, they can design a pricing structure that looks like a discount to the health plan while actually inflating the baseline cost of the entire system. The consequences ripple outward, distorting the behavior of every participant in the supply chain.
Pharmaceutical companies spend millions engineering minor clinical tweaks to old drugs solely to maintain their tier status on the PBM formulary. Independent pharmacies in rural areas close their doors, unable to survive underwater reimbursements, creating vast pharmacy deserts for vulnerable populations. Patients abandon their medications at the counter because the list price, artificially inflated to fund the hidden rebate, drives their deductible payment beyond what they can afford. The mechanism is perfectly rational. The executives running these healthcare conglomerates are maximizing shareholder value within the exact legal framework provided by the state. They have built a machine that converts administrative leverage into financial gravity. They do not manufacture drugs. They do not diagnose diseases. They do not dispense pills. They simply write the rules by which the money moves. And in a highly financialized economy, the entity that writes the rules inevitably captures the margin. Regulators are now attempting to pry open the black box. Lawsuits challenge spread pricing models. State legislatures attempt to enforce transparency laws.
The FTC continues to scrutinize the massive leverage wielded by the Big Six, but the conglomerates are already adapting, shifting their profit centers from traditional rebates to obscure administrative data fees paid by the manufacturers, moving the money one layer deeper into the shadows. The story of the PBM is the story of an industry that learned how to permanently monetize friction. They proved that in a complex system, the most profitable position is not the creator of the product, nor the consumer of the product. The most profitable position is the toll gate in between. As the American healthcare system groans under the weight of its own expense, the architecture of opacity remains firmly intact. We are left looking at a receipt that means nothing, participating in a transaction we do not control. If the middleman owns the insurance, the pharmacy, and the price tag, who is left to negotiate for the patient?